Arizona remembers former Governor Raul Castro, who died early today in California.
On election day, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was 4,000 votes behind. The Native American vote came in, was in support of my campaign. I was elected governor of Arizona.
The legacy of Raul Castro after a last look at the state legislative session. This is Arizona Week. Hello and welcome to Arizona Week. I'm Michael Chihak, in for Lorraine Rivetta. Among the new laws passed by the legislature is one requiring doctors to tell women that medically induced abortions can be reversed. Kathy Harrod of the Center for Arizona Policy was behind the bill, and she spoke with AZPM's Christopher Conover after it became law.
Kathy Harrod, thank you so much for sitting down with us. Let's begin by talking about the abortion bill that the governor signed. A lot of talk on both sides of the issue. That was an issue you had a lot of work in. Obviously, you're happy with the bill.
Yes, Senate Bill 1318 is good public policy for women and preborn children in the state of Arizona.
We heard the opposition, mostly Democrats, saying the provision that deals with information going to women about possibly reversing a medically induced abortion. They've called it quack science. They've called it all kinds of other things which we may not be able to talk about on a public television show. How do you respond to that?
Well, consider the facts. A woman walked into Planned Parenthood, took the first abortion pill, the next day regretted her decision. She went back to Planned Parenthood. They told her nothing could be done. The woman Googled abortionpillreversal.com. That led her to Dr. Alan Sawyer in Glendale, who treated her the same day with abortion pill reversal medication. 2 weeks later, he posted on Facebook an ultrasound picture of her growing child at 12 weeks gestational age. So the facts are the abortion pill may be reversible, but time is of the essence. So in our view, women have a right to know. And when we talk about the abortion issue, it's about ensuring that women have all the information they need to make an informed choice about whether or not to have an abortion. So it's really a fairly simple measure. Shouldn't a woman know that if she takes the abortion pill one day, regrets it, that there is another option?
Governor Ducey obviously signed that bill. It will now go into law. I assume you assumed that it will also go into the courts before it is all said and done.
Well, I'm an optimist. The abortion industry has not challenged every law in Arizona. We have now over 28 different pro-life provisions that have gone into effect, some after court cases. So a number of pro-life provisions have been upheld in the courts or not challenged. So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic that the abortion industry will concede that women should be told about this, that it may be reversible, and that we won't face a lawsuit. But if we do face a lawsuit, we'll certainly look forward to winning in court on this one.
Let's talk about the legislative session as a whole. You got that bill through. Overall, how did the session go from your perspective?
Well, it's a new legislature, a new governor, I think over 20 new members. So that's always, there's some rough spots when you've got so many new members. It's been a compressed legislative session. So in some ways that makes it a little more challenging for everyone involved. But as far as strong leadership by the governor, strong leadership by the Senate President, the House Speaker. So overall, I think a good session. A lot of tough issues to be addressed. Obviously, the financial situation facing the state. So I think overall, a very good session.
As we mentioned, Governor Ducey, this is his first legislative session as the chief executive, and he came in, was sworn in, and a few weeks later, here we were in session. He was presenting budgets and things like that. You've worked with plenty of governors. It might be unfair, but how does he compare to Jan Brewer and previous governors?
Well, I'll just talk about Governor Ducey. I won't do comparisons, but I would say Governor Ducey has shown what a strong leader he is, that having a businessman come in to run state government with more of a business approach, very strong leadership skills, and I think we've seen that these first 2 months. He's not going to shy away from tough issues. He's not going to shy away from proposing solutions to tough issues. And so we have, I think, maybe one of the strongest leaders as governor that we have had in quite some time.
All right, well, thanks for sitting down with us.
Thank you so much.
Now, how business fared in the legislature in Ted Simon's interview with the head of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce. From our sister station in Phoenix, KAET.
Overall thoughts now, before we get too deep in the weeds here, overall thought on the session.
Fast.
Yes,
this was a
it was.
fast session, 81 days, shortest session since we've had color photography. A productive session. You know, we as a chamber, we want to make progress in our competitiveness every year. We did that big time this year. You mentioned the insurance tax. Lee was just on the show. We have to do everything possible so that we're creating jobs in all sectors of the economy. We were also very happy that the governor signed and pushed for in a state of the state the individual income tax indexing bill. That's important to all Arizona taxpayers, and it's important to small businesses who pay under the individual income tax. We made progress in tort reform, regulatory reform. We were very pleased with how the session ended up.
For some of these bills, and specifically we talked about the insurance rates just because the governor signed that today, cutting the premiums. I understand that you say it will spur economic growth. How will that happen, A? And B, the critics say it's happening at the cost of the general fund. I think by 2020, whenever it runs out, it could be up to $45 million hit.
The key here is to make sure that all of our different tax rates are competitive. When we're competing, when Lee is talking about Utah and Texas, all right, let's talk about Texas. They don't even have an individual income tax. So the fact that we made progress in that area this year is important. Our insurance premium tax, if you converted it into a corporate income tax rate, it would be for some companies 13, 14, 15%. It would be punitive. What we did is we made sure that phased in, it's done in a responsible way, so that we're basically middle of the pack. You know, we have to make sure that in all the major levers that companies are looking at, when they're looking to expand, when they're looking to relocate, we've got to make sure that we're competitive as a state, and we're glad that we made significant progress this year.
And yet, we saw cuts to universities, big-time cuts, $99 million to the state's university system. We saw an attempt by the legislature to get rid of Common Core. They didn't quite make it, but it certainly seems like the governor is somewhat ambivalent on this. I know you're big on Common Core, and I know you're big on post-secondary education. Your thoughts, please.
Well, we're big on, we want high standards. We want Arizona standards. And we believe the governor's put into place a process where the state's Board of Ed will do a very thorough review of the standards, and we're going to come out of it with higher Arizona state standards. We believe that that's a big positive. Our universities are very important to this state's economy. The good news, Ted, is going forward, the budget that was passed is based on pretty conservative economic growth estimates. I would expect that what we'll see in the future will be additions to areas like the universities that were cut this go around. I think it's also important to mention that you have a couple of other things playing out. We have some pending lawsuits, including one in the K through 12 system. Mm-hmm. I do believe that did play a factor in terms of this, the governor and the legislature pushing for a more conservative budget. And I think it's also important to say that even before things really kicked off, there were two things that were basically kept in place. One, the tax rate reductions, which we feel are very, very important to maintain the state's competitiveness and improve it. And also the Medicaid restoration effort was kept in place, and sometimes that gets overlooked. So I would say all in all, there was definitely some pain. The governor made it clear in his State of the State there was going to be some pain. But I would expect going forward, the economy will be doing better, and we'll start seeing some restorations in some of those areas.
For those who see these corporate tax cuts, which I think in July we're starting with 100 and some odd million straight off the bat here once the new fiscal year hits, and they see that, and yet they also see cuts not only to education, but for some child services and social services and other things, and they wonder, is that the kind of state that businesses are going to want to come to?
We need to make sure we have a very healthy business environment. And one of the things I didn't mention is that the governor did put in his budget $25 million into student achievement funding for the K through 12 system. This argument, particularly on the K through 12 system, that let's just put more money into it without any sort of regard as to the effectiveness of those funds, is not a good approach. At the Chamber, we have been very strong proponents of putting more money into things like third grade reading. We want to make sure that every dollar invested by taxpayers is properly invested. And look, again, on the university side, I would expect that what we will say, this was a lot of the conservatives in the legislature made it clear that this is the bottom in terms of some of these reductions. I would expect that sitting here, if I have the opportunity to be here a year from today, our economy will be healthier and you will see more funds into those areas.
When do we expect to see the results of all that? We've had a series now of pretty conservative governors and pretty conservative legislatures cutting taxes. We're really going to see the corporate tax cuts come to play here in July. When do we see the results on this? Because as you mentioned, we just had Lee on, and Arizona's not keeping track with the Nevadas and the Colorado. We should be doing better than Colorado and Utah.
It also depends on the ranking. For example, Chief Executive Magazine now has us comfortably in the top 10. We're in pretty good shape with most of the national rankings. And look, we want to be number one on all of these. The governor in the State of the States, or in his inaugural speech, said we want to be the pace leader, Ted. And that's why we're going to keep a laser focus on making sure that our tax, tort, and regulatory reform environment continues to move forward while we push dollars into the classroom, and particularly for our K through 12 system, make sure that those increases in public investment match what actually teaches kids.
Local governments say they had an up and down year in the legislature. Here again is Ted Simons with the head of the League of Arizona Cities and Towns.
Overall impact on Arizona cities and towns.
You know, it was a very busy session, a lot of bills that we had to work on a lot, but overall I think that turned out fairly good for cities and towns. There were some impacts that we're not real happy with, but overall could have been a lot worse.
What are the ones you're not too happy with?
There are several. One of them that we're not delighted about, but my board early on said we'll take a deal, was $10.7 million to pay for some operations of the Department of Revenue. And this is kind of continuing a trend that's happened over the last few years of asking local governments to pay for more and more state agency operations. So my board agreed to do that. In the past, we've actually sued over those kinds of demands, but this time we said we've made a lot of changes to the TPT system. We understand DOR has a lot of pressure. If we can do an MOU kind of arrangement that says we're paying a fee for a certain service, we'll go along with that.
And I know that we've had a couple of debates on these kinds of topics. The local tax on home rentals, that was a big one for cities, and that did not make it. Your concern, obviously the concerns are there.
Yes, oh yeah, absolutely. Those kind of preemptions, and again, a bill that was introduced really without any kind of policy discussion. There wasn't any task force or any report that said this is something that needs to be done, and it would have had an impact of $90 million to cities and towns in Arizona, and an amazing amount of money just for one policy bill, just because somebody said, well, let's eliminate that tax. You know, that would be a nice idea, without understanding the context of our system of financing local government is really primarily based on sales tax rather than on property tax as it is in many other states. So this came out of the blue, and it took a Herculean effort to defeat that one.
And I was going to say, some of the smaller cities and towns in the state, which are normally pretty conservative when it comes to these kinds of things, they always say, you can't do this to us.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a tax that's been on the books for more than 40 years. It's one that has kind of grown up with the state, especially as we have multi-housing apartment buildings and all these kinds of complexes. This is a very key part of how we fund local government.
What about the ban on city bans on plastic bags?
That was one that ultimately got through the legislature, and I assume the governor will sign that. That had a couple of provisions having to do with an energy reporting. I'm not really sure what that was all about, and then also a ban on containers and styrofoam containers and plastic bags that basically says cities and towns can't pick and choose to ban those.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems as though the argument is, especially from cities and towns, is that there's a disconnect on state lawmakers just even understanding how local governments work. Is that accurate?
I think it is very accurate, and in part it's because so many people get involved in the legislative process who haven't ever gone through a local government process. They have not served on a school board or at the local city or town council, and so they get to the state legislature and they're approached by special interest groups and lobbying groups that say, wouldn't it be great if we stopped the cities from doing this or that? So they introduce bills and try to pass them through without understanding that what works in one city doesn't always work in another city, that there's a lot of difference as you cross the state. And we think that most of those kinds of decisions should be locally made rather than dictated at the state level.
And yet many of the bills, as we kind of mentioned in the intro here, matter of statewide concern was the quote that we saw on many of these bills. This seems to be an increasing tendency.
It's been around for a number of years, but I think it is increasing. I just clipped a few bills just before I came over. Property rights are a matter of statewide concern. The sale, use, and disposition of auxiliary containers is a matter of statewide concern. The regulation of retail business is a matter of statewide concern. So the legislators often go to the lawyers, and the lawyers say, well, put this in case you're sued, so we can say it really is a matter of statewide concern. And I think we're seeing more and more of that.
But how much say should the state have on local decisions?
Well, again, it's always going to be a matter of pull and tug. At the local level, we say don't tread on us, and at the state level, they say, well, we're the higher government. We can tell you what to do. So there's always going to be a bit of give and take. But when it gets into some really micromanagement of the local government decision making, I think that's when it crosses the line. And there's always going to be debate over where that line is.
And as far as I noticed that you were concerned with inserting punishment into legislation. Is this a newer trend?
I think it's an increasing trend that if you don't do what the law says, then we are not only going to have the Attorney General or the county attorney file charges against you, we'll also put in statute that you will be fined a certain amount, that you can't use public resources to defend yourself, that you can be removed from office. We're seeing more and more of those kinds of sort of substituting for the judiciary, putting those into state statutes. And we had several examples of that this year on the gun bills, on other bills that affected city officials.
And that guns in public building bill, that failed. Your thoughts on that particular legislation?
2320, that was an interesting one because it's a little different than the guns in public buildings bills that Governor Brewer vetoed for the last 3 years. This one sort of made a distinction between the common man and somebody that has a CCW permit, a concealed carry weapons permit. And it said that you couldn't ban somebody from bringing a weapon in if they had a CCW permit. That's a little different than saying you can't have any kind of ban whatsoever. So that was a little different, but it still would have required any city or any actually state or county that wanted to ban guns in a particular building would have required staff, screeners, lockers, and all those things, an enormous cost, estimated over $130,000 per entrance per year.
Yes.
And that would have been ongoing.
So with all this in mind, and again, we're kind of seeing a trend, we're kind of seeing things moving in a certain direction. What does the league say to, I'm a lawmaker, what do you say to me when I say, yeah, but the state wants this done, and the state does have control over municipalities? You know what,
well, the state in a way does, in a way it doesn't. The Constitution says that charter cities do have some authority,
right.
But there's always going to be that argument, that discussion. What I would say to lawmakers is, go back and talk to the mayors and the council members in your district. Ask them what they think about these particular laws, and maybe some of them would say, we like this set of laws, or we don't care for this set of laws. I think what they need to do is respond more to the constituents that they are representing, rather than to the special interest groups that come and approach them.
Now, the life of former Governor Raul Castro, who died early today. This story first aired last October, including what was Castro's last public appearance and his final interview with AZPM's Lorraine Rivera.
Raul Castro's story begins south of the border in Cananea, Mexico, where his father worked as a miner in the early 1900s. But the family's time there didn't last long. A union strike led to the arrest of his father and deportation of the entire family. Mother, father, 10 boys, and 1 girl.
We got the visas to go to Porterville, Arizona. But when the immigration officer finished with the paperwork, he said, Castro family, you are now in the United States of America. It is up to you meaning don't expect any handouts, don't expect any more help, etc. This is your problem.
And it was never easy. As a boy in Douglas and Porterville, Governor Castro recalls discrimination and prejudice.
When I was in school in 7th District, Douglas, there was a school for Mexican kids. And grammar school was segregated and said, no Mexican kids, no Raul Castro in that class. The dummies, the Mexican kids. Those are the things that motivated me, really did. Instead of making me quit.
I would like to introduce the Honorable Governor Raul Castro.
Experiences he shares whenever asked about his life.
I went to school in Porterville, and the time came for me to go to school in Douglas. We walked to Douglas 5 miles. The buses from Douglas would pick up the white children. This is not right. Things have got to change. Things have to be made better. This is not right. And these are the things in my life that made me push forward to try to see that things changed.
Painful memories and a difficult childhood. But the day Arizona's first governor visited the border town of Douglas may have changed it all. It's a story he tells even now at the age of 98.
The best part of it, though, was living in Porterville. The first governor of Arizona, George W.P. Hunt, would be in town in Douglas, free hot dogs and hamburgers. That was the appealing factor for me. He announced that the governor of Arizona had arrived. Heavy set, big shoulders. He got up. He said, ladies and gentlemen of Douglas, Arizona, thank you for inviting me to speak today for liberty and freedom and opportunity. And one of these days, one of these little barefooted kids, and he pointed right at me, will be governor of Arizona.
A glimpse of hope that ironically offered an insight into the future. It's a moment in time that never disappeared from this boy's dreams.
One day, the teacher in this school for Mexican kids came, put an arm on my shoulder, and said, Raul, she couldn't pronounce my name. You're not making good work. I think you can be a very good student, but you're not being one. On the way home that evening, I thought to myself, that teacher must care for me. Believe it or not, I did become a good student.
A strong student and a standout athlete, he enrolled at Northern Arizona University.
In Flagstaff, I was the king of the campus. Quarterback on the football team, belonged to everything on campus. So graduation time came, and I thought to myself, I'm a big shot. I graduated. I tried to get a teaching job in Arizona. Nada. We don't hire Mexicans to be teachers. So I went to Mother and said, Mother, I'm going to leave you. I can't get a job. I've become a bum, a hobo.
By train, he traveled to Oklahoma and worked the fields, boxing on the side, and he worked at the Douglas smelter. Everything fueled his fire.
You can change things. For instance, when I worked at the smelter in Douglas, I get paid half wages. If your name was Smith and Jones and Blue Eyes and et cetera, you got for $40 an hour. I got $2.20. And I says, why? Because you're a Mexican, and that's get half wages. You could be a miner in Bisbee if you're a gringo, but not if you're a Mexican. You can only be a mucker. That's why you're able to vote.
A job at the American Embassy across the border from Douglas ignited an interest in public service and an idea that maybe he should apply to law school at the University of Arizona. Despite administrative objections, he was accepted and excelled. He's proud to say education forever changed his path.
I was county attorney, judge of Superior Court, a judge of a juvenile court, governor, ambassador in 3 countries. And when I went to Argentina, why would they send a goddamn Mexican to be the American ambassador? That's right.
What did you say?
But once I started walking the streets and walking to the park and talking to people, things changed. And they said, fine. I became a darling of Argentina.
After 14 years of living abroad, friends suggested he run for governor. He lost by less than 1% of the vote. Not backing down from a fight, Mr. Castro tried again, this time winning and making history as Arizona's first governor of Mexican descent.
On election day, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was 4,000 votes behind. The Native American vote came in, was in support of my campaign. I was elected governor of Arizona.
A surreal moment he hopes will inspire for generations.
It's important to me so that other Mexican-American kids could aspire for the same thing and move. I could never stand it. I'd go to Naya's barber shop on West Congress in Tucson, and all these Mexican kids are complaining, griping about salary, wages, and etc. I said, what are you doing about it? Nothing. I'm going to run for county attorney. I said, you're crazy. Who's going to vote for you? You're born in Mexico, Mexican parents. Nobody's going to vote for you. I run for county attorney. To do say there has never been another county attorney in Tucson of Mexican descent. I was there for years. And judge.
Or governor.
Governor, yeah.
A game changer for this boy from the border.
When I became governor, every country club in Arizona wanted me to be a member. Don't have it before, or none of the country clubs in Tucson. I couldn't join them. But once I became governor, why, you know, we love you dearly.
But he never forgot who he was, where he came from, or the journey he'd been on.
Even in Nogales, strictly a Mexican town in every sense of the word. The kids don't have that motivation. They quit. They give up. I used to go to schools and talk to the kids. They say, Mr. Castro, you must come from a wealthy family. And those are the things that sort of kill me. What do I tell them? I said, look at me. When I was born in Cananea, Mexico. And everywhere I go, even now as an adult, I get set back. Border Patrol would stop me. Where were you born? Mexico. Then comes the hee-haw. I'm painting my fence and Border Patrol comes up. Hey, amigo, ¿tiene tarjeta? No tengo tarjeta. That's been the story of my life, really. But that's something that motivated me. Never quit, never give up.
Like Raul Castro's legacy, it lives on, strong, even at 98.
No, a little tattered and torn, really. It's hard. The eyesight gets weak, it's sordo, you know, and it's not easy.
It was never easy for him, as a child, as a man, yet the difficulties were what shaped his character and engendered his accomplishments.
That's our program. Thanks for joining us. For Lorraine Rivetta and all at Arizona Public Media, I'm Michael Chihak.